Text is probably the most important conversion element on any web page. But apart from using words to convince your visitors, text can also be used as an often underrated and underappreciated design element, as you'll see in this video. Hello, I'm Shane Malach from Thrive Themes, and today we are continuing our theme of if you have Thrive Architect, you don't need Photoshop. And I'm going to show you how to build a very interesting typographic graphical layout that if you saw it, you would swear it was made in something like Photoshop. But as you'll see, we'll build it all right inside Thrive Architect. So this here is the first layout that we're going to build. I'm going to show you this one. I'm going to build a whole bunch of other ones afterwards, but this is the one I want to show you the end result first before we start building. And as you can see, it is a multi-layered kind of design with text and images all stacked on top of each other and overlapping each other in various ways. So let's take a look at how to build this. And it's also a way to show off like the typography features in Thrive Architect are one of the things that really sets it apart from other WordPress builders. Most of the things you'll be seeing me build here, you simply cannot do with other tools. I start with a blank page. It's pretty easy. I have some background sections on here and I'll select one of them and give it a background color like this. I'll also right away add a bit of top padding here. I know that I'll need some top padding later. And we're going to start with the first word, the one in the background right here. It says fashion in the background. And yes, in case you were wondering, so none of this is made in Photoshop, right? All of this, I mean, we have an image here. We have an image with an isolated background, or a transparent background, I should say, but everything else is not an image, it's actual text, styled text. So we've got a word that says fashion. And so I'll drop this here. We'll write fashion. And we'll start styling this text. So I will simply I'll leave my cursor in here. What I'll do is I'll centerline it. And so I won't select the word, I'll just select the paragraph itself, basically. And I can do that through the breadcrumbs as well. And so that will apply whatever settings I make here to all of the text in this block and not just to an individual word or letter. That's an important distinction, as we'll see a bit later on as well. So let's change the font. What we have here is Playfair Display, a really nice title font. I will make it bold. We'll make it 900 on the bold version. I will make the whole thing bold, actually, select and bold. And as you can see, the slider here goes to 100, but we want this to be bigger. So we want it to be, and we can manually input any value. So maybe 200 is better, perhaps even more, 230, something like that. I want it to be quite large. Then the color here is going to be very similar to the background color. I've saved this as a hex code. And here comes the first unique and interesting thing you can do with Thrive Architect. So we've got this word, it's very faint, it's not very visible here, and we're going to give it an outline. Now, what you might think is, okay, outline, no problem, right? We've got borders and corners, I can add a border to it. But as you can see, the border is actually added to the text block and not to the letters. So in CSS, you can't add a border around letters, except that you can basically cheat. And what we're going to do is we're going to add shadows. And again, if I go to shadows here, this you can see here, it applies a shadow on the block, which is not what we want. What we want is in typography, in the text options, we want to add a text shadow. Now this applies a shadow to the text. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the blur to 0. So that way it becomes like just a solid shadow. And in my case, we can set the distance to either 1 or 2. I think I'm going to make it 2 just to make it a bit clearer. And then I'm going to make it white and let's say 90%. Actually, let's make it 100%. So we make it all the way white and apply that. And I'm going to set this to 0 degrees. So that's straight to the right. And I'll apply that. Now, how do I turn this into a solid outline? Well, I just need more shadows. I'll set another one, make it white, 100 opacity, and I'll set this to 90 degrees and we'll do distance 2, blur 0, apply that, and I'll just go around in 90-degree increments. So the next one is 180, And once again, all white, 100%. So as you can see what we're doing here, this is actually not a shadow anymore. What it results in by adding all of these shadows and setting them up like this with no blur, no transparency, what we end up having, so the last one would be 270, what we end up having, distance 2, blur 0, oops, 0, apply. There we go. Now what we actually have is an outline on the letters, which is what we wanted. So that's one of the tricks that is good to be aware of. You can create letter outlines by adding all around, basically adding, stacking enough shadows with no blur on top of each other to create an outline effect like this. Another thing I'm going to do here, because this is in the background, I'm going to set this to 1 EM. So the line height, we don't want this to go on 2 lines anyway. And so that this block doesn't take up too much space, I'm going to set this to 1 EM. All right, next up, let's drop an image on top of this. And what we're going to do is, I'm just going to add the image below it. This is our image. And then we're going to move it around a little. Now let's resize this, make it a bit smaller. And what we'll simply do is, we won't have a top margin. In fact, we'll have a negative top margin. So I'll drag this down. And this is how we create the overlap. That's really simple. It only gets a bit more difficult on the next step actually, because next we want to have another piece of text overlapping all of this. So now it's going to get a little bit complicated. So let's put some text in here. It's called Summer Collection. We'll also center align it, and I'll also change the font to something nice, Open Sans. And what I want is, I want the bold to be bold, but not too bold. So that's 600. 700 would be normal boldness, let's say. Okay, I want this text to be all caps, and I want there to be, in advanced, we have letter spacing. I want there to be a lot of letter spacing. And, sized, that's probably, I don't know, maybe like this, and even more letter spacing. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to move this also with a negative margin. I can move this to be where I want it to be. But as you can see, there's a problem. This text is behind everything else. So here's what we do for that. We give it a Z index. So the Z index is basically the stacking order of stuff, right? Coming from, you can think of it as from the screen towards your face. And I'll give this a higher Z index, it's 10 or something. And I have to make the position relative for that to apply. So that's what we have now. And it's still not very visible. And also we've got a problem with the background section here. So what do we do here? With the background section, what we can do is, I'll choose the background section. I'll give it bottom padding until it matches the height I need again. So I'll just add this amount of bottom padding. And the next problem we have that we need to solve is that here the text isn't very readable, so we want to give it a background. So I'll click into the text here again, and I'll give the text a background, which will make white and somewhat transparent, maybe like this. And then I don't want it to go the full width here. So by default, the text block always, fills all the available width. So we go to layout and position for this, reduce this to something, and center align it. That is the effect we're looking for. I can also, if I want to make this bar wider or taller, I should say, I can do that either by changing the line height or by adding inside padding to the text. So this is how we can control the height of this background here. And this, I think, is pretty much the effect we were going for. But now comes the real challenge. And this is also where building the layout like this is superior to just creating an image in Photoshop and uploading it. We're going to make this mobile responsive. We're going to make sure that on all different screen sizes, this still looks good. And this can be tricky, but this is where it's really worthwhile building this stuff like this, actually constructing it instead of just having an image that would just shrink down and become unreadable. And in fact, as a side note, if we shrink this image down, the text becomes really small. But it's not just a problem, small text, if it's real text, will still look crisp, but an image of text shrunken down looks all blurry and isn't readable anymore. So even if all we do is reduce font sizes here, it's still going to be a better end result. All right, so clearly this here is too large. We got to reduce the size here to something else, maybe 180-ish. And I'd like this to still be on one line. So two things we can do. We can reduce the spacing here and reduce the font size. And as a reminder, all the changes we do in the sidebar apply to the screen size I'm looking at right now and smaller screens. So they cascade down basically and not up. Any inline changes apply everywhere. All right, mobile. Here, definitely way too big. And here we have to kind of see if it even makes sense to still have this on one line. I think probably, maybe. Let's reduce that to 80, let's say. So on the image, I think we need to definitely reduce that. And we should also reduce the size of the image here, which is pretty funny right now, the stuff, the way it moves around. That's because we're using so much overlap, but it's pretty easy to fix. So, okay, we make the image smaller, and then this here definitely as well. I want to make this a lot smaller. The letter spacing here. I do want to, I think, just reduce it to one line again, and then change, move this around to set it in the right place. And then we have the bottom padding here, which is going to move. And there we go. So now we have a really cool typography layout, and it looks good on different screen sizes as well. As a quick reminder, there are 3 ways in which Thrive Architect is mobile friendly and mobile responsive. Number 1, everything you build in Thrive Architect is responsive by default. Number 2, you can do style changes and edit styles and sizes and things like that for different screen sizes, which is what I just did here. And number 3, you can use show and hide on elements for specific screen sizes to completely change what different visitors see, or just change individual elements that you want to show and hide on smaller or larger screens. So those are the 3 options you always have. And with a complex layout like this, you might find that it's easier to just hide the layout you built for larger screens and show something else on a smaller screen. So let me show you an example of what that could look like. All right, so I simply build something just to kind of show how different it can be. What we want to do here is I'll select this whole section here, and I'll go to responsive. I will hide it on the large and medium screens. I'll go to this section here. I will go to responsive and hide it on mobile. And now what happens when you switch to mobile is we just have something totally different, right? And, we could go further in kind of demonstrating how different this is. We could give this different background color and everything. But that's just to keep in mind, you can switch out what people see using these responsive settings right here. One more thing worth doing on complex layouts like this is to load the preview, hit F12 to get your browser console, and try some responsive views, try some in-between views here. Here we can see that looks good. Still looks good. Okay, what we can see here, maybe the width of this, right? Maybe we would want to reduce the width of this, which is something that we see here, and maybe we don't see that as easily on the 3 preset sizes in the editor. But as we can see, this works quite well. I think this line across actually looks decent. But just to show you, here's what we could do then to fix this is if we go to tablet, we can select our text, and we've got a set width here, which we could reduce to something like this, and then do the same on mobile. Again, we've got a set width. We can bring down like this. So let's save that and check what this looks like. So now this is how our change affects all the various views in between. There we go. So that was the detailed tutorial on how to build this one layout. And I hope you got some good ideas and learned some interesting things about how to use Thrive Architect and how to use typography on your website from watching this. Now we've created a template which includes this layout that I just built, as well as many other interesting typographic layouts. And you can download that from the bonus templates in Thrive Architect. So that's available right now If you're a Thrive Architect user, you can load that template and you can basically save any of these sections or any of these layouts that you like as a content template and then use them wherever you want on your website. Also, you can stick around and keep watching this video for a fast forward view of how all the other layouts were built. So this is in fast forward, but you can probably still pick up the basic details of how these things were built. And of course, if you have questions about anything specific, or if you try to replicate one of these things and you get stuck, just let us know, leave a comment below, and I'll be happy to reply.